Chapter 23, Tuesday, October 31st, 1786. Chief Blue Jacket didn't understand why it should be, but it seemed that no matter what Indians the Chamonix crossed over the Spele-Withipi to attack, it was always the Shawnee who bore the brunt of the destruction. This time had been no exception. In mid-September, Clark's army had crossed the river again, but this time it was known that he intended to angle swiftly to the northwest to attack the young confederation of 5,000 Piakashas, Ways, and Miami Indians on the headwaters of the Wabash River. The confederation had been established by the wise and fierce chief of the Miami, Little Turtle. As soon as they heard this, the Shawnee, every able-bodied warrior and chief, assembled and joined to aid the Confederacy. But that's where things went wrong. Clark's own spies told him that the Shawnee were moving to help the Confederacy, and so Clark sent General Benjamin Logan back to Kentucky to raise another army to attack and destroy the Shawnee towns while he, Clark, continued with the primary mission. Blue Jacket had thought that for once, with Clark moving against Little Turtle's Confederacy, the Shawnee would be out of the danger zone. And so what had happened? Instead of fighting, the Little Confederacy had listened to peace proposals from Clark's emissaries, and the Miami chief's allies had agreed and convinced the reluctant chief to do the same. This happened before the Shawnee arrived, and by the time Blue Jacket's force got there, Clark's army was already moving down the Wabash River towards the Spele-Withipi, and their confederacy had shattered. There was nothing to do but to return home. Then came the shock of getting back and finding that General Logan's army had attacked, and that 13 of the Shawnee villages had been reduced to ashes. Mackachak, Melunthas Mingo Town, Wapatumika, Mamakomik, Kispoko, Pokshanosis, McKees Town, Wachawala, Chakotay, Peowick, and Blue Jackets Town. The army of nearly 800 men had struck three wings, and with no one to oppose them but women, old men, and children, had cut a great swath across the Shawnee nation. Many squaws had been slain and some children. Meluntha, seeing the helplessness of the situation, had surrendered to Logan and was promised protection, but one officer had calmly walked up to the ancient, unarmed chief and buried a tomahawk in his head, killing him instantly. Many of the squaws and children had been taken prisoners and might now be dead. Among these were Blue Jacket's entire family. A seething rage fell over the returned warriors. This anger made them want to turn immediately southward and retaliate against the Kentuckians, but common sense prevailed. If they did so, those women and children who had been taken prisoner would probably be executed. Furthermore, new wigwams must now be built to protect the remaining squaws and children from the forthcoming winter. And what little grain and vegetables that remained in isolated fields undiscovered by the whites must be harvested. Game had to be killed and brought in, and the meat jerked. They needed to replenish stocks of salt, gunpowder, lead, clothing, and furs, and the best way to obtain these supplies was to capture the boats of the white men coming down the Spele-Withipi. Both Blue Jacket and Black Snake immediately led parties of warriors to the river and separated upon reaching it. Once again, the watercourse became dotted with the wreckage of boats and floating debris, paddles and poles, the grotesque bloated bodies of cattle, and the mutilated remains of whites. And north to the Shawnee village flowed an almost constant stream of supplies. Among the loot that reached these villages were bundles of scalps. They were immediately relayed to Detroit to be exchanged for the British for more supplies. Now, as he leaned forward to cut away the bonds holding this white man to the tree, Blue Jacket wondered again why he was relenting in this manner. By rights, he should have tomahawked him in the first encounter. What had stayed the chief's hand was the remarkable resemblance of the settler to the father of Marmaduke Van Swearingen. And even when he questioned the man and learned that his name was John May, and he was from the limestone area of Kentucky now, and Pennsylvania before that, yet the fact that this man might have been his own father bothered him. From the outset, May had been neither frightened nor defiant, accepting his capture by Blue Jacket as an unfortunate twist of fate. He did not want to die, but he did not want to beg for his life as so many did. And this pleased Blue Jacket, because this was the way he believed his own father would have reacted. And so for the first time since becoming a Shawnee, Blue Jacket allowed mercy to prevail in his decision. "I will turn you loose," he said, "but if you must promise to go back across the mountains into the east and stay there." John May readily agreed, and now he was free again, shoving his small canoe into the water of the river as Blue Jacket stood on the shore of the settler's rifle. Before May was able to pull out of hearing, the Shawnee voice came to him a final time. "Do not return to this country, white man. If I ever see you again, your blood will redden the stream. Remember that." John May was not apt to forget. Chapter 24, Saturday, March 10th, 1787. Blue Jacket could not remember ever having felt so nervous. It had taken many days to set up this day of prisoner exchange with the whites, and so it was a very suspicious group of Kentuckians who met the Shawnee party under the truce flag here on the north bank of the Ohio River across from the mouth of the Limestone Creek. This is the site of modern-day Aberdeen, Ohio. On hand for the whites was half a number, 100 men led by Benjamin Logan. Blue Jacket was in charge of negotiations for the Indian side, but also on hand with Chiefs Blacksnake, Captain Billy, Miosika, Blackbeard, Captain Wolf, and more than 60 warriors. The thought that today he would know whether or not his family was alive caused the heart of Blue Jacket to pound heavily within him, and his face remained expressionless. The white prisoners had not yet been brought up from a place far back in the woods, nor had the Indian prisoners been brought across the river. They stood on the Kentucky shore in a cluster whose very silence spoke more of hope than any words that might have uttered. Blue Jacket felt almost revolted at the declarations of friendship he had to give. Friendship? What could the treacherous whites know of this? The Kentuckians promised the same, but Blue Jacket told Blacksnake in an undertone that they would see evidence of white treachery before this day was done. For their parts, the whites offered the same and promised to bury forever for this day forward the enmity between their peoples. A well-hidden rage swept through Blue Jacket at the knowledge that this was an outright lie, but he said nothing. The prisoners on both sides were assembled, and the exchanges made, and it was time filled with tears and cries of gladness and sorrow. Blue Jacket felt his heart leap when he saw that Wabith, followed by their son, Little Blue Jacket, and their 2 daughters, rushed towards him. He embraced her briefly and touched each of his children on the head, but otherwise was expressionless. There was a white girl of about 16 who didn't know who she was or where she had been captured, and she looked at the white men assembled here and once or twice called out, "Papa," but fell silent when there was no answer. In another case, a white mother was brought across the river from the Kentucky side to identify a girl of about 9. This woman had lost her child to the Shawnee when she was barely a toddler. But if this girl was she, there would be a triangular scar on her hairline where she had fallen. It was there. But though the mother screamed with joy, the daughter screamed in anguish, stretched out to her arms to the squaw who had raised her as her own, and cried out, "Mother, mother!" She begged the squaw not to give her up, until at last the heartbroken Shawnee woman had to run into the woods with her hands over her ears, blinded by tears. When the exchange of prisoners was completed, without any form of ransom in money or goods being demanded by either side, and an agreement made that all hostilities should end for the day, a huge barbecue was begun with 2 beef cattle and 2 elk. The Indians were requested to stack their guns, and as the whites set the example, they did so, but kept knives and tomahawks in their belts. More of the whites came over the river, including many of the women, and quite a few of the people of both races relaxed a little and enjoyed themselves. Dancing was begun, and the Shawnee smiled and nodded at the light step reels. Then the whites watched in open-mouthed wonder the shuffling, circular feast dance performed by the Shawnee. After an hour or so, the festive air faded, and the whites began moving to their boats and crossing to their own side of the river. The final 3 boats were going across when there was a fierce howling from the Shawnee. Gunfire sounded, and little spurts of water erupted around the boats. The men in them were wise enough not to throw down their paddles and start shooting back, but to continue rowing, for they were well out of effective range. Blue Jacket, his face once again set in surly lines, finally ordered the shooting to halt, and the warriors to head back for their villages with the liberated prisoners. It was no satisfaction to him that his earlier prediction to Blacksnake had come true. While the dancing and feasting had been going on, some of the white men had overpowered 2 Indians on guard and escaped across the river with 14 Shawnee horses. The peace had been a short one.